What in the world, in the middle of 1943, in the middle of World War II, would have caused Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill to meet together? Hitler. That's what would have caused it. Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about the Tehran Conference. As I was preparing one of my daily history posts, I saw the information that the Tehran Conference took place on November 28th, 1943. Now, that was not something I had ever heard of before. I knew of World War II, I knew of a lot of the events that took place, but the Tehran Conference I had not heard of before. And I saw a picture of Joseph Stalin sitting next to Winston Churchill, sitting next to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and I thought, what in the world caused the three of them to get together? Well, here's what it is. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Let me say that again. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is exactly what the Tehran Conference was based upon. And forgive me, I do not exactly know what is the correct pronunciation of that word, and I'm probably going to say it multiple different ways throughout the course of this video. So just bear that in mind. What is the Tehran Conference, and what would have caused Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Churchill, Stalin, all to meet in one place? Hitler. Hitler was the thing that caused them to get together, to unite, to realize we've got to face him together. In order to understand the Tehran Conference and what pushed each of these leaders to this place in Iran to meet together, to join forces and become allies, in order to understand what caused that, we've got to kind of go back in history and figure out what caused the three of them to get into World War II to begin with. So let's start with Great Britain. After World War I, Germany was humiliated. It was defeated, and Hitler kind of helped them get back on their feet. But more than that, he wanted to make Germany a powerhouse that it had been before. So on March 7th, 1936, Germany marches into a land that was taken from them in World War I and reclaims it for themselves. This land was known as the Rhinelands. Now, if you go back to the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles took place, and basically what that stated was that no one could go to war, as well as a lot of restrictions and penalties and fees that Germany had to pay to all of those that they were fighting against. So Hitler was kind of testing the waters to see what the other nations would do that had signed the treaty if he broke the treaty. And up to this point, they had done nothing. So Hitler takes back the Rhinelands, but that wasn't enough for him. On September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland, and this officially starts World War II. Now, Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of England at the time, and he didn't want to go to war. And so what he did was he traveled to Germany, sits down, meets with Hitler, and agrees to kind of appease Hitler. Hitler wanted Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain agrees to this if he stops there and goes no further. Now, Winston Churchill was not the prime minister yet at this point, and he saw this take place, and he knew that this was a terrible idea. And he knew that if you give Hitler a little bit, he's going to take a lot. So Hitler invades Czechoslovakia and keeps going, and that was the last straw for Winston Churchill. Churchill becomes the new prime minister and declares war on the Germans. Now let's talk about the USSR and Russia and how Stalin got involved in World War II. Now, Stalin and Hitler get into a relationship, and they're like a bad TV couple, a train wreck that you just cannot look away from. Hitler and Stalin enter into their relationship in 1939 during what is called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which basically decides that Eastern and Central Europe will be divided and each will get a share of them, each Russia and Germany. And it also states that they could not attack each other. Now, their peace in this relationship, it lasted for about 2 years. And historians say that Hitler was always intending to invade Russia. He just needed Russia to help him conquer a little bit more land. So in the summer of 1941, Hitler makes a surprise invasion into Russia, breaking this pact. Now, this surprised the Russians and kind of shocked them, but as they say, revenge is a cold-hearted, well, apparently it's a cold-hearted Russian winter, as the Germans weren't prepared for Russia's cold winters, and it slowed them down enough for Russia to get back up again. Now, Russia and Germany enter into a fight that lasts for 2 years in a bloody stalemate. They cannot get any ground. The Russians are fighting, the Germans are fighting. They lose a city, they gain a city. Now, the tide only turns when Germany surrenders Stalingrad. That's Stalin's namesake. And this really was a turning point in the war. However, Stalin knew that he wouldn't be able to defeat Germany by himself. And he knew that Hitler would never stop, and Hitler was not someone that he could be trusted. And Stalin knows that Hitler is not going to stop until he gets Russia. And so I'll come back to that here in a little bit and kind of explain what Stalin wanted to do. But now let's go to the USA. The US did not want to get involved in the war. That's until December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. And now the US had an enemy at the table of World War II, and they had to get involved. They agree to help Britain fight Hitler, and Britain agrees to help the US fight Japan. This brings us to the Tehran Conference. At this conference, there are 4 things that they wanted to accomplish. And the first thing was Stalin wanted the opening of the Second Front. Now, Stalin had been fighting the Germans on the Eastern Front, and he wanted the UK and the US to attack on the Western Front and kind of divide up the German troops. The US agrees to invade in May 1944. This becomes known as D-Day. The second thing that they wanted was Russia to help the US and the UK fight Japan. Now, Stalin doesn't initially want to discuss this. He doesn't even want to talk about it until Hitler is no longer a threat to Russia. The third thing that they discussed was that they would form a United Nations once the war was over to broker peace. And they had learned from the Treaty of Versailles, and they knew that that kind of treaty would not work again. The fourth thing that they wanted was Stalin wanted an eastern area of Poland to become part of Russia. And what he wanted to do was, Stalin knew that Hitler wanted Russia. So what he wanted to do was kind of create a buffer zone around Russia to keep the Germans out and to keep Russians safe. And so he kind of wanted a part of Poland and other countries to become a buffer zone, and that they could use to protect Russia. So that is basically what takes place at the Tehran Conference. So I always believe that history can teach us something. Every story, even in history, can teach us something if we are just listening to it. It might teach me something different than it teaches you, but I love to take a story that takes place in history and find out what can we learn from it. Here is what this story of the Tehran Conference has taught me. If there's a bad situation in your life, something is advancing on you, an enemy is at your door, sometimes compromises have to be made. Enemies of your enemies can become your friends. You know that they're still your enemy, but you kind of keep that in the back of your mind. And sometimes you just have to be willing to talk to the opposition. In our current political and social environment, they're using these phones to get out there and to talk. And a lot of people are talking and no one is listening. And when we do listen, we listen to respond instead of listening to understand. Sometimes we need to take a new perspective. Sometimes we have to sit down at the table with the one we disagree with the most and broker a peace. Now, that doesn't mean giving up everything. If you look at Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, they didn't give up everything. They came to the table kind of knowing what it was that they wanted to do. And there were multiple conferences that took place after the Tehran Conference, but they kind of had to set the table like, here's what we want to do. Again, that doesn't mean that you have to give up everything. That means that you are just listening and you're trying to find a middle ground with the one you are in opposition. If you have someone in your life that you disagree with, talk to them. Don't talk at them. There is a difference. A lot of times we talk to make a point or prove ourselves right, or we will listen to respond. We're listening ready to know what's our argument, what's our angle that we're gonna push, instead of trying to understand someone. But before you sit down and talk with them, make sure you know what you aren't willing to compromise on. That's what Stalin, that's what Roosevelt, and that's what Churchill did. You have to know where is your line in the sand. You kind of have to have it defined. There can't be any blurry lines of what you want, what you don't want. You have to know what is it that you're willing to sacrifice. That's the only way that this is gonna work. So what I wanna say to you today is, whatever you're going through in life, whatever you are dealing with in this moment, Be willing to, be it another person or just a situation that you're going through, realize that something has to change. If nothing changes, nothing changes. The only way for something to change is to change something. And so you've got to be willing to realize, what can I give up? Let's take the example of money. Let's say that you're always living paycheck to paycheck, you never have enough money, and when something tragic, when something drastic happens, it puts you in a hole. And you get out of that hole, but you don't want to get back into that hole again. Well, again, nothing changes unless something changes. So what would you do in that situation? Okay, well, a lot of people say you need to have an emergency fund. Well, how do I create that emergency fund? That doesn't happen normally from just money falling out of the sky. That happens from you tightening your budget, saying, I'm not gonna go to Starbucks, I'm not gonna spend this much money on going to the movies or whatever. I'm going to cut back in certain areas because this is the goal that I want to attain, because this is the thing that I want to have. And that's what I'm talking about in this scenario is, if you want health in your life, it's gonna sacrifice. It's gonna cause sacrifices. Maybe you can't eat the sweets. Maybe you can't sleep in as much. You're gonna have to get up and do something, and it's gonna cost you something. But that cost is going to be worth it. Just like the three of them knew that this was going to cost them something. This was going to cost them something to sit down at this table, but the cost of doing nothing was way worse. And they knew they had to do something to stop him. So whatever it is that's advancing on your life, you feel like it's gonna take you over, realize you've got to do something about it, and it will cost you something. Know what it is that you're willing to sacrifice and what it is that you won't. And if you can sit down at the table with whatever it is that you're going through, knowing those things, you will come out victorious on the other side of it. I hope that this has inspired and encouraged you. It has me studying this and understanding what took place at the Tehran Conference. I believe that every story has a lesson. Even in history, every story in history has a lesson. And I think that if we can take it and look through it, we can find something inspiring and encouraging that we can apply to our own lives. And I hope that you enjoyed this and that you'll subscribe to this channel. We have plenty more videos coming out, and I will see you next time.